Anger feels very real in daily life. When it arises, it feels justified, it feels necessary, it feels immediate. In that moment, the body tightens, the breath shortens, the mind narrows, and it seems obvious. Someone is wrong. Something is against me. Before trying to control anger, before trying to get rid of it, we are invited to do something much simpler. We are invited to look more closely. As you listen now, notice your body. If there is tension, let it be there. There is nothing to fix right now. Anger often tells us a story of threat, a story of injustice, a story of an enemy. But what if this story is not coming from the other person? What if it is arising from the way the mind is seeing? If anger feels so real, where does it actually begin? In the other person, or in the interpretation the mind creates in this moment? There is a moment most of us know very well. A word is spoken. It may be simple. It may even be neutral. Yet the moment it reaches the mind, something subtle happens. The mind does not wait. It interprets. A situation appears, not as it truly is, but as it is filtered through memory. Old experiences, old wounds, old expectations. Almost instantly, a meaning is assigned. This tone is disrespectful. That look means rejection. This action is against me. And this happens so quickly that we rarely notice it unfolding. There is no pause, no space, just a seamless movement from sound to meaning to conclusion. At this stage, nothing dramatic has happened yet. No conflict, no reaction, only interpretation. But this interpretation is the seed from which everything else grows. In the exact moment a conclusion appears, something very important occurs. A solid sense of I is born. Before this moment, there may have been only sound, only movement, only a situation unfolding. Now there is someone being affected. I am being attacked. I am being judged. I am being threatened. This sense of self feels sudden, but also familiar. It feels personal. At the same time, the other person becomes fixed. They are no longer fluid, no longer complex, no longer human. They are reduced to a role, an obstacle, a problem, an enemy. Notice how quickly this happens. One interpretation creates two solid forms, a self that must defend and an other that must be resisted. From here on, the relationship is no longer open. It has already been framed. At this point, we believe we are reacting to reality, but we are not. We are reacting to a mental image assembled in a fraction of a second. This image feels real because it is familiar. It follows well-worn pathways in the mind, habitual interpretations, conditioned conclusions. The mind says, this is how things are. And because the story feels convincing, the body responds. The chest tightens, the jaw clenches, the breath shortens. Emotion follows interpretation, not the other way around. Anger, fear, or defense are not responses to the situation itself, but to the story about the situation. At this moment, the enemy feels real. And the self that must protect itself also feels real. Yet both were created without ever being examined, without being questioned, simply assumed. This is not a mistake. It is simply how the conditioned mind operates. The mind's job is to protect, so it exaggerates. It simplifies. It turns complexity into certainty, but certainty comes at a cost. Once the enemy is created, connection becomes impossible. Listening stops. Curiosity disappears. Presence collapses into reaction. The body stays alert. The mind prepares arguments, and suffering begins. Not because of the other person, but because of the story we are now living inside. A single, unexamined thought has narrowed the entire field of awareness. A living situation has been reduced to a fixed narrative, and from within this narrative, everything feels personal, urgent, and threatening. If the enemy is created through interpretation, how can we recognize the exact moment when the mind begins to exaggerate reality? Before the story hardens, before the body tightens, before the heart closes. Once an enemy has been created, the mind begins to behave in very specific ways. These signs are subtle, but they are consistent. The first sign is that only one interpretation feels possible. There is no curiosity, no openness. The mind says, "This is obvious." There is no other explanation. Alternative views feel unrealistic, even threatening. At this point, complexity disappears. Reality is flattened into a single storyline, and the more certain the story feels, the less aware we are that it is only a story. The mind does not say, "This is my interpretation." It says, "This is reality." This sense of certainty is one of the clearest signs that exaggeration has begun. When the mind stops asking, it starts defending. The second sign is how the other person appears. They no longer feel human. They are seen as completely wrong, completely insensitive, completely harmful. Their intention is assumed. Their inner world is ignored. The mind no longer wonders what they might be feeling or what they might not be seeing. Everything they say or do is filtered through suspicion. Even neutral actions are interpreted as confirmation of the story the mind has already decided. At this stage, the other person is no longer met directly. They are met through an image shaped by fear, memory, and habit. This image feels solid, convincing, but it is not the person. It is a projection that the mind has stopped questioning. The third sign is the urge to react immediately. There is pressure in the body, restlessness, heat. The mind insists, "I must respond now. I cannot stay silent. If I don't act, I lose." Speed feels necessary. Pausing feels dangerous. This urgency is important to notice. Because urgency is not intelligence, it is fear disguised as certainty. When exaggeration is active, stillness feels threatening. The mind equates speed with safety. But this rush is a signal that awareness has narrowed, that the body has entered defense mode. This is not clarity. It is the momentum of reaction asking to be obeyed. These signs are not mistakes. They are not failures of practice. They are invitations. Invitations to notice what is actually happening in real time. An invitation to see that the mind has shifted from observing reality to defending an image. And yet, even here, something else is present. A quiet knowing, a subtle sense that something is tightening, that the breath is shorter, that the body is bracing. This is not anger yet. It is the doorway to anger, and a doorway, by its nature, still contains space. A small space, but a real one. If exaggeration is already happening, is there any space at all before anger takes full control? The small gap where freedom begins. There is something the mind rarely tells us. Even when exaggeration is active, even when anger is already forming, the process is not continuous. There is a gap, a very small one, between feeling and action. This gap does not appear through suppression. It does not come from trying to calm down or trying to be positive or trying to be spiritual. It appears through simple recognition. The moment we pause, not to fix anything, not to change anything, but simply to notice. This pause is not an action. It is a moment where reaction is not followed automatically. And even though the gap is small, it is real. This is where freedom begins, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. In this small pause, we gently notice the body, the tightness in the chest, the heat in the face, the contraction in the stomach, the shallow breath. Nothing needs to change. We are not trying to relax the body. We are not trying to remove anger. We simply allow these sensations to be felt without resistance, without judgment. The body is not the problem. It is responding to a perceived threat. As attention rests with these sensations, we silently acknowledge what is happening. Not aloud, not dramatically, just a quiet naming. This is an interpretation, not as a concept, not as a technique, but as a recognition that what we are reacting to is a story forming in the mind. And in this recognition, something softens. Anger does not need to disappear. It does not need to be pushed away. Anger is energy, a movement, a signal in the system. The problem was never anger itself. The problem was that anger was given absolute authority. It was allowed to decide, to speak as truth, to command action. When recognition enters, anger loses this authority. It can still be present. It can still be felt in the body. But it is no longer in charge. Awareness becomes wider than the reaction. The body may still be activated, yet something else is now here. A witnessing, a sense of space around the feeling. This is not suppression. This is clarity. And clarity allows us to stay present without being pulled into automatic behavior. In this space, a deeper seeing becomes possible. Anger is protecting something, not the present moment, but an image of me, a self that feels fragile, a self that feels exposed, a self that believes it must defend itself in order to survive. This self feels very real, but notice something carefully. It only appears when it feels threatened. It is not present when the mind is relaxed. When anger pauses, even for a moment, we can look gently. What exactly is being protected here? Is this self solid, or is it a pattern, a memory, a role, a familiar story repeating itself? There is no need to answer. The seeing itself is already loosening the knot. When anger pauses, even for a moment, what is it actually protecting? And who is the self that feels so deeply threatened? When anger arises, it feels as though something important must be defended. A line seems to have been crossed. A boundary appears to have been violated, but instead of following the story immediately, we pause. We look inward. What is this me that feels attacked? Anger does not arise simply because of words or actions. It arises when the mind believes there is a solid self that can be harmed, diminished, or disrespected. Without this belief, anger has nowhere to land. Now observe how this sense of self behaves. When someone praises you, the self expands. There is warmth, a subtle feeling of importance. When someone criticizes you, the self contracts. The body tightens. The breath becomes shallow. When the self feels threatened, it hardens. It prepares to defend, attack, or withdraw. This happens automatically, not because something is wrong with us, but because the mind has learned this pattern over time. Notice something quietly revealing. This sense of self changes with conditions. Anger depends on the idea of a solid self. It needs something firm to protect. But when we look closely, we see that this self is not fixed. It arises with thoughts. It shifts with circumstances. It softens when attention relaxes. As this becomes clear, anger begins to lose its authority. Not because it is suppressed, but because it no longer has solid ground beneath it. When the self is seen as fluid and conditional, the figure we call an enemy also begins to change. When the self is no longer solid, what naturally begins to appear in its place? As the mechanism of anger is seen clearly, something subtle begins to shift. The image of an enemy loosens, not because the other person suddenly becomes right, but because the mind is no longer exaggerating reality. We begin to see that the story we were reacting to was shaped by fear and habit. The person in front of us is no longer a fixed threat, but a human being responding from their own conditions. This is where compassion appears, not as weakness, not as moral obligation, not as something we force ourselves to feel. Compassion arises as understanding. We see that others act from fear, from habit, from confusion, just as we do. They are not choosing harm consciously. They are responding from what they know. When this is seen clearly, the heart does not need instruction. It softens on its own. This compassion is quiet. It does not excuse harm. It does not require agreement. It simply understands how suffering moves through the mind. True compassion does not mean losing boundaries. It does not mean allowing harm. It does not mean remaining silent when clarity is needed. Compassion means seeing clearly without adding hatred. We can say no without hardening the heart. We can protect ourselves without turning someone into an enemy. This balance becomes possible when understanding comes first. The mind is no longer trapped in reaction. Choice returns. If understanding has already softened the heart, how can we experience this shift directly in our own lives? Now, we take a moment to practice together. This is not a deep exercise. There is nothing to solve. Please recall a mild irritation, something small, not a painful memory. Let it come to mind gently. As you do, notice the body. Notice where there is tension. perhaps in the chest, the jaw, or the belly. There is no need to change anything. As you stay with this irritation, silently name what is happening. Say, inside, "This is an interpretation." Notice how the body responds when the story is named this way. Now, gently remember, this person is a dependent process, not a fixed enemy. They are shaped by their past, their fears, their habits, just as you are. You are not excusing behavior. You are seeing clearly. Now bring attention to the breath. Breathe in and allow the body to soften. Breathe out and allow whatever can release to release. Do not force anything. Let the breath do what it naturally does. With each exhale, feel a little more space, a little less pressure to react. At your own pace, silently say, "I choose response, not reaction." If even a small release is possible now, what might become possible through gentle, repeated practice in daily life? This path is not about becoming a better person. It is about being less captured by confusion. Freedom does not begin when anger disappears. It begins when anger no longer decides who we have to be. We are invited to practice gently. Pause before responding. Clarify instead of assuming. Let the self soften 1 degree at a time. Nothing dramatic is required, only honesty, patience, and the willingness to see clearly. As you leave this moment, nothing needs to be resolved. You may still feel irritation. You may still feel uncertainty. That is okay. What matters is not perfection, but awareness returning again and again. The next time anger appears, see if you can pause, even for 1 breath. That single breath is already a different path.